everyone, and welcome to this mixed media process. So this piece took some interesting twists and turns on its road to completion, but like all unplanned pieces, that is to be expected. Getting started, I am using some modeling paste and I am just spreading it over the entire 18 by 24 inch canvas just to get a layer of texture on the canvas to begin with, because that just always seems like a really good starting point to me. After the modeling paste has completely dried, I went in with my PowerTex Universal Medium textile hardener and I started adding some items that you would probably normally throw away or recycle, because let's face it, one girl's trash is another girl's treasure. Scraps of canvas, just stuff like that, and started trying to create a composition on the canvas to begin with, and then mixing my own little concoction of crackle paste. I started to add that to the canvas as well for another added layer of texture. But I wasn't done yet. Oh no, there was some fabric that needed to be involved here. So I really like this kind of papery fabric, and it has a really interesting texture to it. This is actually something that I've had lying around for a while, but I just never used it, but I definitely will use it again. And of course, no mixed media piece will be complete without a little bit of twine. And so that needed to happen. Once that had dried completely, I put a thin layer of gesso over the entire canvas. Once the gesso had completely dried, then it was time to start painting. I've really been loving the kind of earthy palette lately, so I went in with kind of my winter palette, I would like to call it, for the most part. But I went in with more of a limited palette to begin with, and I really like to start with more of a flowy sort of paint at the beginning of these processes, because it's much easier to manipulate, move it around, and it also allows me to see the textures, so that if I can remove paint or, spray water on it, get those drips, also use some rubbing alcohol, then it allows me to see the texture underneath, which is really important because that's going to help me to figure out exactly where I want the darker shades of paint to be. I also tend to go a lot darker at the beginning before I start going lighter. So it starts to look like a kind of this weird Tim Burton-y effect on this painting at the beginning of it, but that's all going to change once the lighter colors are added to it. The choice of tools when applying paint is equally important, because at the beginning, the main priority for me is to get the white out of the canvas, so that's another reason why I go more fluid at the beginning. And then when I'm adding more paint, like opaque colors to the texture, I tend to use things like rubber brayers and squeegees, and then go in and remove some paint so that I can ultimately see exactly what that texture is going to be. So this painting went through kind of this awkward adolescent phase, you could say. I mean, beauty is not going to be present throughout the whole entire process. It definitely came into a better standing, I suppose, once I started adding the gold paint, and also once I started adding some patches of more fluid paint over the textured areas, so that there was a difference between the texture and it wasn't just all really grungy. I think that was kind of an important point in this painting, an interesting turning point. But as I looked at it, I was really kind of unhappy with the placement of whatever it is, whether it's a moon or an orb. At this point, I wasn't really sure what it was going to be. I didn't like the fact that there was such a distance between that and the horizon line, and so in my mind, I started thinking of things that I could maybe put in that area, and I decided that I was going to put the painting aside for a second, and I was going to make some canvas scrolls. And it would act as sort of like a point of interest between, so there wasn't like just this blob of space between that orb, moon, whatever, and the horizon line. And so I didn't attach them right away because I wanted to work on the bottom or the base of the painting and sort of get those earth tones in there and work on some drips and make that a little bit more interesting before I added anything else to it. But that was definitely kind of where I was going. So this isn't attached or anything, but I wanted to see how it looked with the base of the painting, and I was like, wow, that really looks kind of cool. It looks like almost a fence, you know, and it's got a really cool effect. So while I was doing all of that, I decided that I wanted to have a point of interest that was kind of in the center of that circular shape, and I decided, of course, my favorite thing, corvid. A corvid, yes, my spirit animal. I love my crows. So a crow it was going to be. So I went in with acrylic inks after I did a rough sketch, and I was like, okay, well that looks pretty cool. It's like on a post kind of in the center, but I really thought that it looked a little bit flat, and I was like, well, you know, I'm going to attach the scrolls and I will see what happens after that. So I went in with my textile hardener, the PowerTex Universal Medium, and that's how I attached the scrolls to the canvas. I went in and did the back of the scrolls first, and then I put a layer of the textile hardener onto the canvas, and then I carefully attached the scrolls. I used more of the textile hardener on the fabric ends in order to attach it to the canvas, and this is something that dries totally transparent, so I wasn't worried about covering up any of the paint underneath. So I allowed everything to dry overnight, and then the next day I really wanted to bring a little bit more depth into where the crow was, so I wanted that circle, the edges of it, to recede a little bit. So I went ahead and started darkening all of that area and kind of making it into a warm vignette. I thought that it would add a little bit of warmth to the top part of the canvas and also just add some depth and dimension to it to make certain areas recede and other areas pop forward. I did the same thing with the kind of golden reeds that were going around that, at least that's what it looked like to me, and so it made the gold pop forward even more. After that, I went on to the crow, and to make it look less flat, I ended up just adding some brush strokes to it in order to just give the impression of feathers, and that kind of tied everything together. But anyway, I do have a full video on my Patreon. If you're interested in seeing that, head over there, and I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you enjoyed this process, and yeah, I love you guys, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!